The story begins in Kyoto during the Bakumatsu era. We see a long samurai as he faces off against a group of swordsmen. They charge at him, but he slashes through them, taking them out with ease. Another group arrives, and the captain prepares to face the samurai, recognizing him as a Hitokiri, one of the most infamous assassins of their time. We jump forward 15 years to the 11th year of the Meiji era. The samurai Kenshin walks through a town, but is stopped by a young girl named Kihoru. She calls him a Hitokiri and says she's there to stop his killing spree, and she is certain because Kenshin has a sword despite the Sword Abolishment Act. She starts attacking him, causing him to trip over his feet and fall over. She wonders if he is actually a Hitokiri, and he tells her he's just a wandering ronin. He explains that he has just arrived in the town. She points out his sword, so he shows it to her. She realizes it's a Sakabato dot, a sword with a reverse blade that is useless for killing, and Kahori notes that the sword seems almost brand new. At that moment, a police whistle blows. We see a large masked swordsman attacking multiple officers. Kahori tries to help, but gets slashed by the man. She dodges, but gets cornered as the man thrusts at her. Kenshin arrives just in time and moves her out of the way. Another group of officers arrive, and the man retreats after announcing that he is the Hitokiri of the Kamiya sword style. Kiharu tries to chase him, but is stopped by Kenshin, who tells her that it's too dangerous with her injuries. She pleads, saying that Kamiya is her sword style and the bandit is committing murders using its name. Kenshin flees with Kiharu before the police arrive, and at the Kamiya dojo, Kenshin sees Kiharu's full name, Kiharu Kamiya. He notes that the dojo has no students. As Kahora gets her wounds tended to by an old man named Kihei. She explains that all the students left after the bandits started using their name while killing people. Kenshin cautions her not to try and fight the bandit again because the bandit is stronger than her and pride over a sword style is not worth dying for. She tells him the Kamiya style was meant to be a life-giving sword style created by her father and that she can't let the name be tarnished. But Kenshin cautions her again before leaving. Kihei finishes dressing her wound and warns her not to open up to strangers like Kenshin, saying that wandering samurai are failures. A few days later, Kiharu and Kihei see a crowd on the street and they find Kenshin being arrested by an officer. Kiharu goes to inquire what happened but ends up arguing with the officers until Kihei resolves the matter by bribing them. Kenshin asks Kiharu about the Crossroad Killer case and she informs him that she has a lead. She suspects a former dojo from a neighboring town that was taken over by a samurai in the past 2 months, the same time as when the killings started, and we see that the samurai's description matches the masked bandit. Because she's not bothered by a person's past, she offers Kenshin to stay at her dojo, but Kenshin says he has errands to run. She tries to apologize for the last time, but he simply tells her not to worry about it. Kenshin decides to check out the bandits' hideout, and we learn that he has been searching for them in the town for the past few days. At the hideout, Kenshin calls out till someone answers. Kenshin learns that the bandit's name is Haruma. He accuses Haruma of being the Crossroad Killer. But several bandits appear and surround him. At the Kamiya dojo, Kihei shows Kihoru the document he prepared for selling the dojo and reveals to her that he intends to take over the dojo as Haruma and the bandits emerge from behind. We learn that Haruma is the younger brother of Kihei and that Kihei had been trying to coerce her into selling. They had used the Hitokiri's reputation as a manslayer and the Crossroad killings to tarnish the Kamiya sword style. Kihei tells Kihoru that he anticipated the property prices to increase because of a westernization policy and didn't want a dojo to take up such prime real estate. Haruma towers over Kihoru and mocks her. She swings her wooden sword at him, but he stops it with his hand, easily breaking it with a single swipe. He picks her up and Kihei acquires her bloody thumbprint as her signature. Suddenly, one of the bandits collapses at the door, revealing Kenshin behind him. And we see that he defeated everyone at the other dojo. Haruma asks him if he also believed in a life-giving sword like Koru, but Kenshin tells him that he doesn't and that swords are only weapons for murder. However, he says that he prefers her ideals over the truth. Haruma is irritated and orders his men to kill Kenshin. Kenshin calmly readies himself and gives the bandits a chance to leave. They attack and Kenshin unsheathes his sword, blowing away multiple bandits with a single strike. Kihei is shocked, and Kihoru is amazed by Kenshin's speed, while Haruma starts to get nervous. Kenshin defeats all the bandits, and we learn that the sword style of the Hitokiri was not Kamiya, but an ancient sword style called Hiten Mitsurugi, a lethal and fast sword style made for fighting multiple opponents, and we find out that Kenshin is a real Hitokiri. Haruma unsheathes his sword, and prepares to fight Kenshin. He accuses Kenshin of holding back. But Kenshin tells him he doesn't like to get violent. Haruma charges at Kenshin, but Kenshin is too fast. He vanishes from in front of him, reappearing above him, and with a single powerful swing, he defeats Haruma. Kenshin turns to Kihei, threatening him with his sword. Kihei falls to the floor, winning himself, and Kenshin rips up the contract, apologizing to Kaharu for hiding the truth. He begins to leave, but Kaharu stops him, asking him to help with the dojo. She reminds him that she doesn't care about people's past, but Kenshin tells her that having a real Hitokiri around is not a good idea. She eventually gives up, but Kenshin changes his mind and decides to stay at the dojo for a while. Kaharu wonders how old he is, realizing that if Kenshin was a warrior in the Bakumatsu era he would be over 30, and she is in disbelief because he looks so young. After a week, Kaharu is frustrated because the Crossroad Killer case has been resolved. But still none of her students have returned. She goes to find Kenshin, who is outside washing clothes. She inquires about his age again, saying he couldn't possibly be 28, and he wonders if she would rather he was over 30, which bothers Kaharu. Kenshin and Kaharu walk through the town as he assures her that her students will return eventually. She is upset that Kenshin wouldn't practice with her, so she has to go to an acquaintance's dojo to practice. At that moment, a boy bumps into Kenshin. And Kaharu seizes him immediately, telling Kenshin that the boy is a pickpocket. She recovers his wallet from the boy, who asks her to let him go. Kenshin willingly hands his wallet to him and tells him not to get caught next time. The boy is infuriated by Kenshin taking pity on him, so he throws the wallet back at him. The boy reveals that his name is Yahiko, claiming he was only playing a prank, and Kenshin recognizes his courage, so he apologizes for underestimating him. The boy runs off. And they walk through the town. As Kaharu wonders why Kenshin spends his time as a ronin, we learn that most imperialists have taken up positions in the Meiji government and were abusing their power. Kenshin remarks that Kaharu looks like she wants to ask him a question, but Kaharu says it's nothing, asking him to hide his sword because it could get him arrested, but he is nonchalant about it. Kaharu tells Kenshin to do some shopping while she heads to her practice, and just as Kenshin, as a general, asks for directions to the police station, Kaharu gives him the directions, and he thanks her as he leaves. In a dark alley, Yahiko encounters two thugs who tell him that his payment is due. Yahiko tells them he doesn't have it, so one of the thugs hits him in the face. He steps on Yahiko and threatens him to have his money by tomorrow. While Kaharu is on her way to practice, she notices a commotion and a man informs her that the police have arrested someone. We see officers surrounding Kenshin. As Yahiko joins the crowd, a squad of sword-bearing officers make their way through the crowd as the lieutenant, Ujiki, orders the unarmed officers to leave. Their captain is reluctant, telling him that Kenshin isn't resisting arrest, but Ujiki hits him. We learn that Ujiki is a Satsuma revolutionary warrior and he urges Kenshin to draw his sword, but Kenshin refuses, saying he doesn't brandish his sword to show strength. At that moment, Kaharu runs toward Kenshin, calling out to him. And Ujiki spots her, realizing that she is with Kenshin. As Kaharu comes closer, the officers swing at her, removing her ribbon. Ujiki threatens to violate her if Kenshin doesn't draw his sword. He explains that he can legally kill people, and the crowd is outraged by this. So he feels insulted, ordering his men to arrest everyone in the crowd as he gives them permission to kill anyone that resists. The crowd retreats, and Kenshin pulls out his sword to defend the people, challenging Ujiki to a fight. He mocks Kenshin's sword and is delighted at the thought that he gets to kill someone. At the chief's office, we see that the general is disappointed to learn that the Hitokiri he had come seeking was a fake. We learn that although Kenshin had killed many people, he had never done it for his self-interest. He saved many revolutionary warriors and was the reason for the revolution's success. We learn that the general is looking for Kenshin because he wants to make him a high-ranking officer for his imperial ground troops. The chief mentions that the bandits pretending to be Hitokiri said they were caught by the real deal, and this makes the general feel hopeful. An officer suddenly interrupts, mentioning the sword-bearing police as the chief realizes that Ujiki caused another scene. The general asks about them and the chief explains that they are a police squad made up of ruffians and their captain is an imperialist from Satsuma. We learn that imperialists are categorized into 5 groups. From them, Satsuma and Shoshu are the 2 great factions of the Meiji government, with Satsuma having authority in the police and Shoshu in the military. The chief asks the officer what happened, and the officer informs them that Ujiki has been defeated by a long swordsman. The officer begins to describe Kenshin, and the general is immediately alerted as he recognizes him. Several officers lay defeated on the ground as the remaining officers charge at Kenshin, but Kenshin swiftly deals with them until only Ujiki remains. Kenshin gives Ujiki an opportunity to apologize, but Ujiki decides to attack instead. As Ujiki lifts his sword to strike, Kaharu recognizes the stance as a deadly sword style called Jigenryu. Ujiki brings his sword down, but Kenshin evades easily, launching into the air behind him and landing the finishing blow. Kaharu immediately runs to Kenshin as the crowd surrounds them, praising them for dealing with the officers. The general calls out to Kenshin through the crowd, and we learn that the general is the imperialist Iratama Yamagata, and he led the most powerful army of the revolution. General Yamagata asks Kenshin to return with him, but Kenshin declines the offer, explaining that he doesn't wish to kill people. The general is shocked, and promises that he will forcefully stop anyone that speaks ill of him. That is precisely what Kenshin doesn't want. He tells the general that he fought to create a world where people can live happily, but the general reminds him that they live in a different era and that there is nothing Kenshin can do alone, but Kenshin tells him that he can still protect the people he cares about as they start walking away. The officer ensures the general that he would overlook the incident, remarking how different Kenshin is from what he had imagined. He remembers that he has yet to make his payment to the thugs, and he picks up the wallet. At the dojo, Kenshin returns from shopping and thinks about Yahiko. Yahiko returns the old lady's wallet instead of stealing it, and Kenshin thinks Yahiko would have made a great samurai. Yahiko is pretending to be a swordsman when the thugs show up asking for payment. He informs them that he doesn't want to be a pickpocket for the Yakuza anymore, so one of the thugs knocks him to the ground and brutally thrashes him with a stick. Yahiko maintains his resolve and the thug kicks his face, wanting to show him who's boss. Yahiko is beaten unconscious by the Yakuza thugs as Kihoru returns from her practice and spots the thugs carrying Yahiko away. Yahiko is taken to the Yakuza group where he is presented to the thug's boss. The boss tells Yahiko that they live in a different era where money is more important than pride and that Yahiko wouldn't survive even if he was from a family of samurai. He says that all previous samurai are now thieves. He urges Yahiko to return to him and work as his henchman. Yahiko spits at him as he refuses, so they start beating him up. They tell him that he owes his life to their boss and that his father died poor when he went against the imperial army. Yahiko gets mad, so he attacks the thug, biting down on his balls. We learn that Yahiko's father wanted to redeem himself for betraying the shogunate, so he fought for the shogun until he died an honorable death. Yahiko says he cannot allow anyone to disparage his parents like that, and the thug recovers, unsheathing his sword as he prepares to kill Yahiko. Kenshin suddenly bursts through the door, kicking the thug away. The thugs see Kenshin, so they call for backup, but Kenshin informs them that it's useless because he has already defeated all the guards outside. Kenshin tells them that he is there for the boy. As the thug gets back up, trying to attack Kenshin, but he swiftly counters, sending the thug flying. Kenshin addresses the boss, asking him to let Yahiko go as he threatens to defeat all of his henchmen. The boss becomes fearful, so he agrees to this and Kenshin turns to Yahiko to take him away, but Yahiko refuses, saying he could have dealt with the thugs on his own. Kenshin apologizes for underestimating him once again, saying he needs to have his wounds treated, so Kenshin lifts him up. One of the henchmen thinks about attacking Kenshin, but the boss stops him and tells them that Kenshin has the eyes of a Hitokiri. Yahiko is frustrated that he wasn't strong enough to fight for himself, to protect the honor of his father, wanting to become stronger. Kenshin brings Yahiko to the dojo, where they see Kihoru waiting for them. Kihoru is worried, saying they need to go see a doctor. Kenshin introduces Kihoru and tells Yahiko that she will be his teacher, shocking both of them. Kenshin assures Yahiko that he can be strong. But Kiharu and Yahiko can't seem to get along. In the dojo, Kiharu tries to teach Yahiko how to hold a sword, but he slaps it away, so they get into a heated argument. Kiharu complains to Kenshin, who tells her to be patient. The next day, Kiharu is excited to see several people arrive at the dojo wanting to join. She figures it must be because they heard about the sword-bearing police getting defeated, but Kenshin is concerned. So he tells the people that the sword style they saw him use against the sword-bearing police will not be taught at the dojo. Hearing that, all of the students leave and this makes Kihoru upset. But Kenshin tells her that students who join out of curiosity wouldn't even last 6 months. Yahiko arrives and says that he can't get stronger while dealing with Kihoru, asking Kenshin to teach him his sword style. Kenshin refuses, telling him he has no intentions of passing along his sword style. After some time, Kiharu is looking for Yahiko, who is sitting on the roof. She complains to herself about Yahiko, but he overhears her, so he throws his shoe at her, telling her that he never really agreed to be a student at the dojo. Yahiko jumps down, and he asks Kiharu why none of her students returned, but he stops himself when he sees that Kiharu feels hurt by what he said. At that moment, there is a call for Kiharu, and they find 2 men wounded at the door. Kiharu recognizes them as former students, Hira and Sato. 2 gang members arrive, and Kihara faces off with them. They charge at her, but she swiftly outmaneuvers and defeats them, impressing Eiko. The 2 explain that they came across a group of drunks who were causing trouble and held them down, so their buddies started chasing after them. Several gang members gather outside the dojo, and Kihara takes everyone inside to hide them. We learn from the gang leader, Hachisuka, that these were members of the Hishimanji gang. Kihara recalls that the gang is even more tenacious than the Yakuza, and we learn Kenshin is not at the dojo because Kahora sent him out shopping. Yahiko blames Hira and Sato for the situation, accusing them of lying. From the smell of alcohol on them, Yahiko figures that they were the ones drinking and causing trouble. He guesses that they must have picked a fight with the Hishimanji gang, and they confirm that to be true. At that moment, the wall is suddenly destroyed. We see that the gang possesses a wooden cannon, which was used in the Bakumatsu era. Hachisuka tells them that they want revenge for his friend's broken arm, and Kihoru is shocked to learn that her former students used their swords against someone. Yahiko is disgusted that they returned to the dojo to seek refuge after abandoning it during the crossroad killing case. Another cannon blast is fired, and Yahiko offers up Hira and Sato to the gang, but Hachisuka demands that Kihoru also be punished for hiding them. Yahiko is against this. But Kihoru offers to take all of the punishment in exchange for their safety, explaining that she feels responsible for their actions. Hachisuka reaches out to grab Kihoru when Yahiko runs up and kicks him away. Hachisuka threatens to kill Yahiko, but Kenshin suddenly returns to the dojo. Kenshin tells them to stop acting out of stupidity, and a gang member informs his boss that Kenshin was the one who crushed the sword-bearing police. They fire the cannon at Kenshin, but he quickly slices the cannonball in half, leaving them speechless. Hachisuka orders his men to retreat, and when Kenshin learns of what happened, he orders Hira and Sato to leave and never pick up a sword again. Kiharu was upset because she doesn't have any students, so Kenshin tries to comfort her. Yahiko enters the dojo, telling Kiharu that he will be her student, and together, they clean up the dojo. We see the gang getting beaten up by a man named Sanosuke. Hachisuka yields, and Sanosuke says they are too weak, calling their fight boring as we learn that he is searching for a worthy opponent. Yahiko is practicing his sword skills out in the yard as Kenshin chops wood. He is irritated by Kenshin being so close, saying that it breaks his rhythm. He continues to yell at Kenshin when Kahara shows up seemingly happy about something. She breaks up the argument and tells them that their financial worries are over. She shows them her grandfather's old painting she found while cleaning, saying that her grandfather was a popular artist and this painting is worth a lot of money, so she decides to treat them to a fancy restaurant. Sanosuke enjoys his meal at the restaurant as he listens in on some activists arguing over politics in a booth nearby. Kenshin and his friends arrive at the restaurant and the waitress mistakes Kenshin as Kohora's boyfriend, causing her to be flustered. The three sit down and watch the drunken activists argue. A flying cup hits Kenshin's head. The activists had thrown it during their argument, so Yahiko confronts them, asking them to apologize. The situation escalates, so the waitress tries to intervene, but she ends up getting hit. Sanosuke catches her, saying that democratic rights are supposed to help the weak and calls out the activists for being hypocrites and bullies. They challenge him to a fight, and they go outside the restaurant, where a crowd gathers to watch. One of the activists attacks first, revealing a small metal weapon hidden in his palm called a suntetsu. However, Sanosuke is unfazed by the blow, and we see that the suntetsu has pierced the activist's own hand instead. He pulls it out and decides to attack again, as Sanosuke tells him he will only use a single finger to defeat him. He charges at Sanosuke, who simply flicks him away, sending him flying back with force. The other activists pull out a sword, at which point Kenshin threatens to get involved, telling them to correct themselves before trying to correct the government. After the activists leave, Sanosuke asks Kenshin about his head, revealing that Kenshin didn't dodge the cup on purpose to protect Kihoru from getting struck. He challenges Kenshin to a fight, but he promptly declines. As Sanosuke leaves, they see the word bad written on his back, and they become confused, wondering if he is a good guy or a bad guy. We see Sanosuke being hired by the Haruma brothers, who have escaped from prison. They want him to defeat Kenshin, and Sanosuke asks if Kenshin is strong since he is seeking a worthy fight. Haruma tells him that Kenshin defeated him with a single blow, but Sanosuke isn't impressed by this. So Kihei tells him that Kenshin is actually the fabled Hitokiri, exciting Sanosuke, who thinks he might finally get to use his secret weapon. At the hideout, Haruma impersonates Sanosuke, mocking him because it has been 2 weeks since he disappeared after agreeing to beat Kenshin. They think he ran away, but Sanosuke returns, telling them that he was busy fighting. As we learn that Sanosuke is popular in the underground society of Tokyo as Zanza, a fighter for hire. At the dojo, Kenshin prepares as he senses Sanosuke's arrival. They find Sanosuke, who tells them he is here to fight as a hired fighter. He's excited to fight an imperialist, and we learn that Sanosuke had been collecting information on Kenshin. He reveals that Kenshin was a former imperialist from Shoshu, and worked for 5 years since he was 14, first as a murderous assassin and then as a commando samurai against the shogunate. Sanosuke says Kenshin has been missing since his job at Fushimi and is frustrated that he knows what Kenshin did but doesn't know the motivation behind it, stating that is the reason he wants to fight. We see the brothers hiding nearby and Kihei explains that he doesn't expect Sanosuke to win but he hopes that Kenshin is weakened enough that he can kill him with a gun. Kenshin asks Sanosuke why he fights for hire if he hates bullies and Sanosuke explains that he despises imperialists thinking they are hypocrites so he is eager to fight the strongest imperialists. Kenshin figures out that the Haruma brothers are Sanosuke's clients and notices them hiding behind the gate. He calls them out and Sanosuke takes their gun, destroying it as he tells them not to interfere. Sanosuke states that the dojo is a bit cramped so he wants to hold the fight by the river as they walk. Kenshin asks Yahiko if he is surprised to learn the truth about him. He is more concerned about the fight, noting the size of Sanosuke's weapon and guessing that it might be a spear. Sanosuke introduces himself to Kenshin as he unveils his secret weapon, telling him he's known as Zanza because he wields a zanbato, which is notoriously hard to wield due to its weight. He explains that it's an antique and it can't cut, but he can still crush something with it. As Sanosuke warns him not to hold back. He dashes toward Kenshin and slams down the zanbato with immense strength, but Kenshin dodges, coming up behind him. Sanosuke tries to block, but Kenshin swings his sword, sending Sanosuke flying through the air and crashing far away. Yahiko thinks Kenshin has won, but Sanosuke walks out unscathed. They are shocked because no one is ever left standing after an attack from Kenshin. Sanosuke declares that the last one standing wins and they prepare to face off again. Hiruma is excited to see Sanosuke still standing. Kihei is afraid that he still might lose, but he tells Hiruma he has a plan. Sanosuke tells Kenshin that his attacks won't work and Kenshin asks him to end the fight. But Sanosuke says they are just getting started. Sanosuke leaps forward, slashing at Kenshin who dodges the attack, and Kenshin jumps onto his sword to force it down. He gets his sword free, but Kenshin thinks that since one of his attacks wasn't enough, he unleashes a barrage of consecutive attacks. Sanosuke is knocked down, and Kenshin explains that his attacks are too predictable because his sword is too heavy, limiting his choices for attack. Sanosuke thinks he can't win because Kenshin is far too strong, and Kenshin asks him to end as he lies on the ground. Sanosuke remembers his past. 10 years ago, we see the Seikyo army marching into a town and learn that they are spreading word about having the land tax if the imperialists take over the shogunate. We see a young Sanosuke among the soldiers and we learn the Seikyo army was formed as a nationalist squad after the Battle of Fushimi. They were all civilian and non-official and they served as the vanguard to the imperial forces with the first unit being led by Captain Sozo. The army rests past the village. Sozo is by a cliff as Sanosuke runs up to him. The captain shows him the village below and remarks that it's wonderful to see it prosper. He tells Sanosuke that the age where the weak were abused has ended and a new era of equality for the four classes has begun. But at their camp, the group is shocked to learn that the government general has labeled the Seikyo army as a fake imperial army and ordered for their capture. The messenger informs them that his group has already been eradicated. They think that the imperial army changed their intentions to follow through on having the land tax, so they are being blamed for it, being framed as fakes. The captain tells them that since they can't go against the government general, they will go to a stronghold, but he tells Sanosuke and another boy to stay behind. Sanosuke waits for Sozo on the steps, when the other boy runs up looking panicked. He cuts through a crowd to get to the front, where he sees Sozo's head displayed. And the speaker tells the crowd that having the tax was the captain's idea, saying he was tricking them so they are all disappointed and thinking that the Seikyo army are all criminals. Sanosuke is reinvigorated and he gets back up, explaining how the Seikyo army was made to bear the word bad on their backs while the imperialists pretended to be just. Sanosuke charges with everything he has, but Kenshin manages to block it. Sanosuke falls over, but Kenshin acknowledges his strength. Kihei takes the opportunity, and he suddenly shoots Kenshin with his gun. Kenshin is blown back and falls to the ground. Kihei starts to gloat, but Kenshin surprisingly stands back up, revealing that he blocked the bullet with his sword. Kihei aims the gun at Kiharu and orders Hiruma to break their legs so they can't escape. Yahiko tells Kiharu to run, but she is frozen from fear. Hiruma reaches for them when suddenly the Zanbana flies past, slicing his nose. Sanosuke warns them to not interfere, and he is still determined to win. We see Kihei has another gun, but Kenshin is too fast and lands a barrage of attacks on him. Kenshin thinks that the revolutionary warriors should be the ones who were the word bad. Sanosuke retrieves his sword and returns to continue fighting Kenshin, who thinks it's time to settle things. Sanosuke raises his sword, spinning it aggressively over his head. And Kiharu explains he's adding centripetal force from this spin to his strength. Sanosuke explains he got stronger by fighting in the streets all the time for 10 years. He wishes to defeat the strongest imperialists, but Kenshin tells him that won't happen. He attacks and their swords clash, but we see that Kenshin has cut the Zanbato in half. Sanosuke is stunned and Kenshin jumps up, bringing his sword down on Sanosuke with tremendous force. Sanosuke reels back, but he still stands. Kenshin is concerned and says he's going to find a doctor, but Sanosuke tells him he's not done, screaming that he can't lose to an imperialist even if it kills him. Kenshin walks up to him as he's raging and punches him in the face, asking him what the Sakyo army taught him. Sanosuke tells him that the imperialists fought for equality, but became greedy and abused their power. Kihoru defends Kenshin, saying that he doesn't care about a post in the government and he is a Ronin that protects people. Kenshin explains that although the revolution ended 10 years ago, the weak are still being oppressed, so he is trying to help people with his sword no matter how long it takes. And we learn that Kenshin believes this to be his atonement for his past as a Hitokiri. Sanosuke is reminded of Captain Sozo and feels Kenshin is similar to him, but he collapses to the ground, finally admitting defeat. We learn that it would take 3 months for Sanosuke to heal from his injuries. But Kenshin says that he couldn't hold back because Sanosuke was strong. Kihoru and Yahiko reassure him that he's not like the other imperialists and hope that Sanosuke also understands. Kihoru suggests going for some hot pot at the restaurant when suddenly a man is thrown through the front door and we see it's the activist again. The three are surprised to see Sanosuke is already walking around and he boasts about his ability to take hits, but when they poke at him, they see he is just bluffing. Kenshin asks him if he will remove the word on his back, but he says he can't forget his past, and he tells Kenshin he will be watching him to see if he is really different from the other imperialists. He adds that he's no longer Zanza since his sword was destroyed, so he has stopped being a fighter for hire. As he leaves, Kenshin thinks he's an interesting guy, but the waitress rushes out, telling them Sanosuke didn't pay his bill again. But that's where this video ends. Let me know in the comments if you would like to see more of this series.